Right, a good evening to you and welcome to News Sources, Ladies' Night edition. The year is 2017 and we have less than 8 months to the next general election. I am Julie Masiga. Welcome to the show.
Indeed, this is one year where content, context and analysis will take center stage as the country chooses its next president. Happy New Year to you. I'm Sharon Momani. Before we start, let's have a look at the highlights.
We are committed to a joint platform for the forthcoming general elections as a united opposition against the Jubilee administration.
I wish to urge all opposition supporters to discard the fears that Jubilee will steal the August elections. They will not.
Tunarudi kwa streets. Na tunataka kumwambia General Ngaiseri, go and buy more tear gas, go and buy more poisonous water.
Now, opposition parties have today met to cement formation of an alliance that they say will unseat President Uhuru Kenyatta in the August elections. Over 4,000 politicians, among them elected leaders and aspirants eyeing opposition party tickets, met to coalesce around what they said would be a huge opposition movement that will win the general election. Leader after leader from the various opposition parties who took to the podium called on Kenyans to register as voters. Core Principal Kalonzo Musyoka said he was willing to sacrifice his presidential ambitions in favor of another flag bearer. James Orengo read out a resolution that stated that the opposition parties are committed to a joint platform and an opposition alliance.
We are committed to a joint platform for the forthcoming general elections as a united opposition against the Jubilee administration. We are embarking on a vigorous campaign to register all eligible voters during the mass voter registration exercise that begins on Monday, the 16th of January.
Right, welcome ladies.
Thank you.
Happy New Year, indeed an election year. Excitement, let the games begin. Right next to me here is Betty Waitherero, political researcher, friend of the show, frequent panelist, and newcomer Sarah Bakata, associate editor at the Nation Media Group.
Thank you.
And of course, my lovely co-host, Sharon Momani.
Right.
Welcome, welcome. So now, today started off just the way we expected an election year to begin, with lots of excitement around coalitions and people coming together to try and battle it out in the campaign period. And so opposition parties coming together under NASA, not expressly saying that they will be called the National Super Alliance, but saying they're committed to a common platform. Do they have a chance in hell, Betty?
I think that they might have made a lot of progress from the last time we had this conversation about NASA. They have found a way to, get past a few barriers and disagreements, open disagreements that they were having previously, especially between Mudavadi and Raila Odinga. But when you hear statements made by Nick Salat about KANU being Ndani, and then Zipporah Kitoni comes out and says, hell no. Mm-hmm. So you see that they don't really seem to be having a unity within themselves about this alliance, and then amongst the different political parties. I don't know. I'm optimistic for them that they've gotten this far, and it's an interesting showing. But it seems that there's a lot of inner rumblings that need to be fixed before they go ahead and say, you know what, we're going to be able to unseat the Jubilee administration. That sort of delinking of unity, even within the political parties and then between the different political parties, is a serious hurdle for them to overcome if they plan to be serious.
Yeah, and then you also get the feeling, when I was watching them today, I got the feeling that this is about the officials themselves. There has not been a groundswell, like in the past, let's say, a week or 2 weeks or even months. It's like they've been talking among themselves all of a sudden, and the people they've brought to Bomas are the people who are going to vie. What about the people who are going to vote for them? These are the people who are going to decide this election. So all of a sudden you have leaders. It's good that, as Betty has said, they have decided that they are going to work together. Well, let's see them do it. So far, I don't get the feel.
But do they even have that formula of working together? Because I think many people expected them to be very decisive today on a number of issues. For starters, I don't know how soon we're going to know who the
flag bearer
will be.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is a good strategy or not, because some people say that, maybe they're keeping Jubilee guessing, then they wouldn't know how to, play.
It's not about Jubilee. They should be thinking of their voters. You will watch that thing. I think the Bomas thing was like 4 hours, 5 hours, and everyone kept asking, what are they going to say? What's the end game of this entire thing? And at the end of the day, it was, let me just use this bad word, underwhelming. That's the feeling I got.
They didn't even launch at the very least to launch an official.
To say that they're willing to work together as a coalition, which they did say, that they're committed to a joint platform come August 4th. I know they did not say they're part of a new party, but they committed to being a united opposition.
I'll say something. At least we know who won't be the presidential flag bearer, because Kalonzo Musyoka just, threw in the towel, preemptively.
Said,
so I'm ready to sacrifice. So okay, so it's not going to be you. Who is it going to be?
Right.
In terms of holding a huge conference to, tell people, what, we're committed. I don't know if it was necessary, but maybe it was for those who are vying for these seats. To feel that they are being included and being taken care of. But as Sarah has said, what about your voters?
Right, ladies, allow me to engage. We have a guest, the governance and the strategy consultant from our I&M studios. That is Dr. Walter Ongeti into this conversation. And a good evening to you, Dr. Ongeti. Many thanks for joining us on the show. An obvious confusion to Kenyans, or a question that Kenyans would have. Really, what was the biggest, in your opinion, achievements, if any, that the opposition had today? Because many expected them to make at least one, announcement, whether it is the launch of NASA or whether it was that presidential flag bearer. To you, what is your analysis of what happened today at the Bomas of Kenya?
Yeah, good evening, ladies, and indeed, thank you for having me in studio. Indeed, there was a lot of anticipation from many Kenyans that there will be something groundbreaking coming out of Bomas, that indeed there will be some strategic initiatives that are going to follow up to what had been signed as the elections laws, the Amendment Act that was appended to by the president. But it was an ordinary meeting. You realize that previously CORD has had hype, pomp, and color. Raila has been used to bringing out hype. There has been, if you hear Raila's rally or meeting, you're expecting some interesting intrigues. I think, to me, it was a flat meeting. I think it was just to cool off the anticipating supporters that would have hoped for mass action. But at the end of it, again, the fact that Musalia Mudavadi then came on board as it had been anticipated, although to me, there is no much value that then he brings on board. It was just flat.
Right. And of course, you speak about that mass action that was anticipated by many. What would you say was the reason for the backing off, as it were, by the opposition on this call to mass action?
I think they are well informed in terms of attributing it to voter registration, and that was a good move. We should give credit to them, and indeed also just cooling off the tension that would have been anticipated. Remember that this amendment comes hot on the heels of the fact that there had been initially mass action that led to the negotiation of that particular act that was being amended. So the fact that they thought of postponing, and it is because maybe they also read the mood of the country. I think January is here with us. Most parents and people are settling back to work, and they must have just thought that they hold back a little bit, which is...
All right. Thank you for that. And please stay with us as we fine-tune this discussion. And President Uhuru Kenyatta has assented to the election law that allows backup plans for the August election if the electronic voting system fails, despite fierce opposition from rivals who say that any manual arrangement will open the ballot to rigging. Speaking today at the NASA conference at the Bomas of Kenya, Kakamega Senator Boni Khalwale said that the government is planning to rig the election using ghost votes during the manual election election system, a sentiment shared by Bungoma Senator Moses Wetangula, who said that the opposition would call for mass action to contest the contentious election law after the voter registration process. The NASA meeting resolution rejected the amendments in total.
If the government will not have vacated this law that is going to facilitate the theft of elections, tunarudi barabarani. Tunarudi kwa streets. Na tunataka kumwambia General Ngaiseri, go and buy more tear gas, go and buy more poisonous water, go and do everything you can, but go and also learn a lesson from the Shah of Iran. Go and learn lessons from how dictators have fallen. And you'll realize that brute force is a catalyst for a great movement.
All right, ladies. So Dr. Ongeti is of the opinion that this was actually a sober decision by, the opposition to just put on the back seat this call for mass action and go. Well, the mass action they're taking now is on voter registration. What's your take on that?
I think that was a good move because an election is about numbers.
Right.
And for a long time, the opposition problem has been numbers. And for today, actually, I was very impressed. Every speaker who went onto the podium actually said, when you go back home, when you go back to your constituency, please go and urge all these young people, tell them to go to Huduma Center, pick your ID and go and register.
Right.
Finally, they're talking about something sensible. You know, there's no fighting. Just go and pick your ID, register and vote, because that is the first process of an election.
Right.
That
and of course,
somebody
part of
will
this
turn up.
four-point strategy that we saw Raila speaking about also. A good tack, Betty, you'd say?
I think so. I agree with Sarah that it's important, and I think not just for those who support the opposition, but actually all Kenyans to go out and register as voters. This is your chance to make a decision, even down to the MCA level. I think I mentioned this on 31st December, that you can actually make a difference down to who you choose for your MCA to represent your interests at the county level, and that is very important. That is why they're having all these huge rallies and why you're seeing all these posters and everyone trying to be an aspirant. It's important. Having said that, mass action as a resort has so far, okay, you exerted pressure, you got the IEBC reforms that you wanted, and now, you want us to go back to the streets again to do what now? Because you can use the court process, yeah? So for me, I feel that the particular arguments are not weighty enough to warrant resorting to streets level,
and the
action.
argument here is that there's a loophole for rigging that the manual backup system would present.
Well, they have the same platforms. They can also go back to Parliament and remove those loopholes. If you see the amendment, it doesn't.
All amendments, were brought in Parliament.
No, but first of all, okay, in Parliament, they had a good argument. They said they didn't have the numbers. But come to the Senate, which is supposed to be the sober house, they were just not there.
A conveyor belt, as we saw one of them.
If you saw what happened there, they just didn't show up, And that was the place where most probably, even the other guys on the Jubilee side, maybe if the opposition side would have had good arguments, they would have won over some people, but they didn't.
Right,
that was
let's
my take.
engage Dr. Walter Ongeti, who is at our INM studios, governance and strategy consultant. Dr. Ongeti, do you think we're going into the next election on an uneven playing field if we go with the election law as it has been amended? And does the opposition have a leg to stand on by saying they will go to the streets to try and protest those laws?
Yeah, I would have wished that during the amendment of this law, the bipartisan approach would have worked well. But that having not happened, and now we have the law in place, and the court having failed short of calling for their street protest today, I don't think that there will be any more street protests. Remember that 1 month of mass voter registration would take us to around March, and from March, the code should then then be focused on the strategy of winning the elections if they would be participating. And I don't think anybody will fail to participate in those elections. But listen, if you finish those voter registration and some of those candidates realize that they had more numbers coming in from their zones, that will be a point at which now this NASA will break. Because each of those guys will be saying, I have more numbers, I should be the presidential candidate, or else I'm going to Jubilee to bargain with my numbers. So the registration of numbers, and this is where the suspicions even in court has been, that if you encourage the supporters of Wetangula to have more numbers, then Wetangula has numbers to bargain with, wherever he wants to go with those numbers. If you talk about Raila having more numbers, then he has a point to bargain with, and the same applies to Kalonzo. So I'm seeing the call for voter registration being a good thing for CORD or NASA, for that matter, but also being a point which then they will create some group dynamics and crisis. But also remember that some of those candidates who are now coming on board, like Musalia Mudavadi, had numbers that came in from support from people like Eugene Wamalwa. Now, Eugene Wamalwa now is in Jubilee. Musalia got 170,000 votes in the last elections, drawn from areas that had been lobbied in by Eugene Wamalwa. If those numbers then move to the President Uhuru Kenyatta, then Musalia Mudavadi therefore comes on this table with less than 200,000 votes, which will not add any value to NASA at all.
Right, Dr. Ongeti, thank you so much for your comments. Thank you for being on the show. But moving right on now, Deputy President William Ruto has pressed for the listing of over 16 million unregistered voters in Rift Valley. Speaking yesterday when he met elected leaders and aspirants from Rift Valley at his current home in Nairobi, Mr. Ruto said that listing would help President Uhuru Kenyatta get elected in August. The DP emphasized that an August victory would be a springboard for his quest for State House in 2022. He said prospects of succeeding Uhuru in 2022, as per the plan, was largely dependent on how the region will vote in the August general election. Right. This meeting he had yesterday at his current home. Today he had yet another meeting with gubernatorial aspirants for the Nairobi seat. And at this meeting today, if we can start there, he said that they're going to, by consensus, some kind of consensus, choose one single candidate for the governor position in Nairobi for the Jubilee side. And sources say not everybody was happy about that, but it seems that this is a country where we negotiate everything and we think about democracy later. I'll start with you, Sarah. What do you think? What do you make of this entire scenario?
I mean, it being, because it's a party and they're going to decide as a party, I think they have a right for the party to decide who's going to run for this seat. That's their choice. But how they come up with that choice, and when they're making that choice, I hope they do have at the back of their minds, this person that we are going to put forward, how is it going to resonate with the voters? Because whatever politicians say, whatever party officials say, at the end of the day, it's the voter that matters. Right. You're going to put somebody out there, and all the voters will be like, hey.
But don't you think then they should subject all their candidates to like democracy and have a vote for a nomination vote instead of just trying to negotiate a single candidate, Betty?
Okay, so this is a problem that Jubilee has. You have 5 or 6 pretty strong candidates, or relatively strong candidates on their own, but none of them are strong enough to stand up against Kidero unless the others back them. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
Unless the others back them, you can't stand up against the incumbent. So the infighting in the nomination process that you're suggesting, like, go to a ballot and let them pick one via nomination, it will cause people to shift their allegiance to the incumbent.
But isn't that a consequence of
that
democracy?
will actually happen. And then you... Okay, and again, what Sarah has pointed out is that they will pick somebody who maybe the voters do not resonate with. And again, the incumbent wins. So Jubilee is in a very tight position. Very tight position. I would not, if I was Ruto, and I agree with his strategy, I would not test the sort of party newly formed and the resolve of party members by putting this to a vote.
So what then would be a winning strategy for Jubilee? Or are they damned if they choose one and damned if they don't?
Absolutely. I think they're in such a situation. As she says, they have strong candidates, almost 6 of them, and all of them I think only one maybe is an outsider from Nairobi,
Right.
if the former Gatanga MP is running. But the rest are people strong on their own, but they need the backing of the others. They're in a really tight situation.
All right, and let's just engage Dr. Walter, who is still with us from our I&M studios. And just talking about the candidature of Jubilee on the Nairobi gubernatorial seat, what's your take on the strategy that would be winning, or at least, of good chance, because Nairobi is largely an opposition, seat when it comes to the governor's seat?
Nairobi has always been a very tricky county, and it will remain to be a very tricky county. As it sits now, the Code side has an incumbent. They almost certainly would be fielding Evans Kidero. Of course, then Jubilee would have to negotiate for a candidate. There will be no way out. If you place that candidate through a nomination process, or all these candidates through the nomination exercise, then there will be a lot of acrimony. But remember, even a candidate who can go through the nomination exercise and campaign through the Jubilee side to have a ticket will really burn out. And then, Kidero is just on the other side waiting for you. So it will be easier for Jubilee to save its energy to go in and try to wrestle Kidero than to allow these candidates to burn out at the nomination stage. And therefore, it will just go for, if I were to advise, I would advise that you go for a negotiated candidate. But that negotiated candidate, the question here lies in, and this will have we have to be very realistic. We move to the tribal arrangements here. The tribal arrangements being that the communities that are perceived to support court are communities that are going to support Evans Kidero. So you must have to get a candidate who can eat in those numbers that are the numbers that Evans Kidero would have, then combine with those communities that are perceived to support the Jubilee administration or the Jubilee wing. So if you get a candidate who is purely Jubilee, then you're not going to, you'll end up with a nearly, Kidero wins with around 50+1%. But then if you get a candidate, and that is where the arrangement of bringing in somebody like Eugene Wamalo was there. I don't know where Eugene disappeared, but that arrangement would have really worked very well, because then he would have eaten into Kidero numbers and added on Jubilee numbers and just won that seat.
All right, many thanks, Dr. Walter Ongeti there, just staying with us through the first hour as we had that discussion on the political atmosphere. And let's move on now. And in his New Year address, President Uhuru Kenyatta warned against election violence and criticized opposition politicians for resorting to protests to push their political agenda, adding that echoes of the 2007-2008 post-election chaos should be wiped out. He castigated the opposition, who he said have embraced politics of confrontation, saying that threats of mass action if the government does not drop controversial amendments to the election laws were a recipe for unnecessary political tension. Meanwhile, Raila Odinga has said that the cost of rigging the election will be regrettable for the government. All considered, it could be argued that the country is being asked to choose between a peace and a free and fair election.
They have shouted insults in rallies and held the presidency, which belongs to all Kenyans, in contempt. They have even in past threatened to march to the seat of government and overthrow the government of the people. This, fellow Kenyans, is not opposition politics. This is disruption and undermining of our country.
I wish to urge all opposition supporters to discard the fears that Jubilee will steal the August elections. They will not. We shall not allow it. We shall make it impossible for anyone to steal the elections. But we are also sending word to Jubilee again that the cost of stealing this election will be regrettable. Therefore, don't try it.
Right, and before we get into that discussion, let's draw your attention to our Twitter poll tonight. And we're asking you, can a united opposition unseat the Jubilee government in this year's general election? Can a united opposition unseat the Jubilee government in this year's general election? Do tweet us your views at KTN News, at Julie Masiga, or at Sharon_Momanyi using the hashtag news sources, and we shall sample a bit of your views during the end or during this bulletin as we continue continue with it. And on that discussion now, we're seeing a lot of allusion to peace, free and fair election. Are we seeing genuine commitment by our leaders to this, rhetoric about free and fair, or is it just a political tool that we are seeing? I'll start with you, Betty.
Okay, this is what I see. Yeah? We have reached a point where peace and free and fair elections have become mutually exclusive in the political mindset, which is not true. You can actually have free and fair elections, and you can also have peace.
Right.
And you can have, and in fact, they both of them run together. In my view, to have a free and fair election, there must be peace. Let's remember that
in a well-functioning
exactly
democracy.
In a well-functioning democracy. Let's remember that threats of violence or instigating violence happen often whenever there is a problem with the election, okay? And that is one of the electoral irregularities reported, that there were threats, there's intimidation, there's harassment, whether it's through distribution of leaflets or announcements by political leaders about ethnic groups or or their rivals. That all of that is an absence of peace in an election, and of course that contributes to this particular election not being free or fair. So you can see that sort of. You can see the sort of stance the president is taking is like, listen, if you want this to be free and fair, you have to tone down the sort of rhetoric that you're putting out there. Okay. On the other hand, you look at Raila Odinga's contention that they will attempt to steal the election. I don't know what this is based on, but he has made this allegation previously, and he's made it last year as well. Actually, beginning of last year. The first thing he said, one of the first announcements he made is that Jubilee will rig the election. I don't know what that is based on. And in fact, that has been the basis of his campaign most of last year.
So that you illegitimize the process right from
exactly.
the start.
And that becomes questionable.
But Jubilee is not helping the situation by changing election laws and continually saying or alluding that technology will fail on the day, and therefore we must have a backup. And that backup being manual transmission of votes and manual identification of voters, whereas we register electronically. So why is nobody mentioning that registering bit and just focusing on the identification bit?
And that's
Shouldn't we just audit the entire system?
That's what many people are finding curious, that the government side is so sure
Technology
things will fail.
Yes.
You don't start from a basis of it will fail. Let's start from a basis where we are going to have a free and fair election. It's going to be peaceful. And with all due respect...
But Sarah, isn't it their role to ensure that in the event that it actually fails, because if it does and then we don't have a backup, they're going to be on the hot seat.
But the backup should not have to be manual. It could be any kind of technology. But they are saying that technology will fail, kind of trying to say that we will not consider using any other kind of technology.
Yeah. Right.
Is what I was...
Oh, okay. Let's go back to the amendment itself. It does not specify exactly what kind of backup. It does not specify. So I guess this whole discussion about manual and versus electronic transmission has been influenced by what happened in the U.S., where there's now it's becoming clear that clearly Russia interfered with the election.
Right, Betty, I'm going to have to interrupt you there, sorry. We can come back to your point when we get back. Now to the doctors' strike, and it is estimated that more than 50 people have died since government doctors went on strike 5 weeks ago. Thousands of patients who rely solely on public health facilities have been forced to seek treatment elsewhere. Doctors have rejected a 40% pay rise offer that was made by President Uhuru Kenyatta and are demanding full implementation of the 2013 collective bargaining agreement. As Kenyans continue to ail, tonight we ask which way forward on this long-running battle of wills.
Anything called allowances or whatever offers may be made outside this collective bargaining agreement then cannot be considered to be an offer by the union.
Once the CBA is accepted as the basis for negotiation, then the matrix of implementation can be negotiated.
Right, so the doctors strike a month and 6 days now, I think, and almost no action from the government, offering less than half of what the doctors were demanding. I understand we have a Dr. Nelly Bosire at our INM studios who's joining us to give us a bit more insight into where we have reached with these negotiations. Dr. Bosire? Well, before she comes on, ladies, yes, it's been a month of suffering. So where does the responsibility lie? Who should give in? Because it seems like there are two elephants fighting and then citizens are just basically dying.
Personally, I have a very brief comment on that. I think the government needs to listen to what the doctors are saying. Today I read the full-page advert that ran in all the national newspapers by the government. Right. It's a long thing saying very, very many things, but according to me, it boils to one thing. The CBA was signed in 2013.
Right.
Who was supposed to push for that CBA? Look at what were the shortcomings, what was supposed to be done, who was supposed to implement what was supposed to be rectified before it was registered. Nobody. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody wants to take responsibility for that. So one day we wake up, it's 2017, the doctors are on strike. Right. And then we're taking them back to 2013. Right. I mean, what happened between all this time? What was going on? Meanwhile, the doctors have been on strike, I think twice before this year. And nobody wants to remember that. And all this time they have been asking for the same thing.
All right, so Dr. Bosire is with us now from our INM studios. Dr. Bosire, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I think let's just go right back to the beginning, to the CBA agreement, which was signed, I believe, in June of 2013. After that, whose responsibility was it to lodge that with the court so it could have the force of law?
By labor laws, that's a very clear-cut decision. This was supposed to go straight to the employer. It is the employer who takes the CBA to the industrial court, registers it there, and therefore then that allows room for implementation of the CBA to start taking place. So this was supposed to have happened in the year 2013. And just so that I take you back just a little bit, we're all in the assumption that the CBA was negotiated for in the year 2013. It was not. The CBA negotiation began in 2011 with the 2011 strike, where the current president was the then Minister for Finance, who actually brokered the return to work formula with the doctors, which had 3 items that were considered. That 1, the doctors would get a certain stipend added to their salary. That 2, there would be a roadmap of healthcare implementation that would be done, which is popularly known as the Musimi Task Force report. And thirdly, that the ministry and the doctors would then sit down and negotiate a CBA, the very first CBA that then would guide subsequent CBAs in this engagement. So then that was the premise on which doctors agreed to go back to work in 2011. The CBA was negotiated throughout the year 2012. It was completed actually in January of 2013, before we even went for elections, before we even had a discussion about devolution and all these things.
But was it registered in court or not? That
is where the challenge came in, that the signing of the CBA was done in June of 2013, and then subsequent taking it up with the new government and the new cabinet secretary and principal secretary never happened. Now, the doctors made noise, they did everything they could, and you know, nobody was giving in. So eventually, the union was forced to go to the courts and ask the courts to then force the ministry to do what it needed to do, which was to register this CBA in court. And this case went on for 18 months, and in October the 6th of this year, the court actually gave direction and said, look, can you sit down, agree on these contentious issues you're saying are there, the 2 or 3 clauses you're not agreeing upon? Can SRC have 30 days to give its input? Can the CBA then, can we have a clear roadmap on its registration and implementation?
Now, Dr.
All these deadlines have already expired.
Sorry to interrupt you, but as at now, taking all that into context, where are we in terms of negotiation? And is there an end in sight, or are we seeing a strike that might go on for months?
What I'm going to tell you is that clearly we haven't even begun negotiating. Because every time the government is coming to the table, it's just having a discussion about how let us give you 40% pay rise and what have you, and they're refusing to discuss the reason why the doctors are on strike. The doctors did not go on strike to ask for a pay increment. The doctors went on strike to have the CBA implemented. So giving doctors 40% pay rise is tantamount to trying to bribe them into dropping what they went on strike for, which is the CBA, and yet the CBA encompasses so much more than just money. And that is what people need to understand.
Can you give us an idea of what else the doctors were asking for in that collective bargaining agreement?
What was negotiated was very, very wide. It was really to manage healthcare for doctors in Kenya, in keeping with the fact that we realize just how few doctors we have. So the CBA is addressing how do we attract, how do we retain, how do we deal with matters of career progression within the public service, how do we do in-service training, how do we do transfers, because that's really a bone of contention a lot of times. And this was basically to ensure that there has to be a doctor even in the most remote areas of this country.
One final question, sorry to interrupt. Now that Kenyans are suffering and dying in their numbers, are the doctors willing to extend an olive branch and try and come to some kind of interim agreement, or how long do we see this going on for?
The doctors started from the outset by extending an olive branch. They said, look, this post-CBA process started from 2011. We're here today. First of all, let's start by acknowledging it is here. Let us start by paying the doctors and doing all these other things that we've talked about in the CBA. The olive branch was that, look, we understand we're talking about arrears from 2013. We are willing to negotiate a matrix on how these payments can be done. But the government doesn't even want to start discussing the CBA itself. So the olive branch then becomes null and void.
Right, Dr. Bosire, thank you so much for joining us and giving your insights and bringing us up to date. We do hope that this doctor's strike will end soon enough and both parties will find some common ground. Thank you.
Right, from that thorn in the flesh to yet another, and following calls from Kenya National Union of Teachers, Secretary General Wilson Sossion and Opposition Chief Raila Odinga for the audit of the 2016 KCSE examination results, Education CS Fred Matiang'i has said that he will not be derailed from his resolve to reform the education sector. The CS is standing by results which saw a significant drop in the number of A's attained and a steep rise in students who failed flat. Tonight we question whether Kenyans have extended too much goodwill to a man who some say might have gotten it wrong. And ladies, just to hear your views on the same, when he started his very stringent reform, so to speak, some praised him, and right now Kenyans are really asking whether we gave him too much. What is your audit of the same? And not the question they really asked in the report that they gave when they're calling for this total recall of the results, says that is this massive failure evidence that there was no cheating this time?
You know, let me just say this, yeah? For the first time in 20 years, 20 years of teachers going on strike every year. And I feel it personally because my child has been through this education, public education system from the get-go. 20 years of teachers going on strike every year, you know. 20 years of, I suppose, cheating from, you know, I'm going to say 20 years of cheating. Let's just say, you know, they've been cheating for a while. Yeah. You know, for the first time, the entire country is realizing that the education system in Kenya is in shambles. You're finally getting it.
But at what cost?
You're finally getting it. You see, because all this time, these kids were passing and there was some cheating going on. And you never felt it. You never realized that this is a big problem if the teachers are always going on strike. How is the kid learning? You know?
It's not even just some cheating.
Right.
Let's just be honest as Kenyans. It was an open secret. There's been massive cheating, as she says, for the past 20 years. I'm not sure about how many years back, but it's been an open secret. And if Sossion and Nat are very they want to be very open about this. There's an organization called UWEZO. UWEZO does a report on the education system in the entire region.
Right.
Every year they come with a report. And for the past almost like 7 years, it's been quite indicting.
So the question, Sarah, has been, is this the results that we saw? Is it an indication of the level of the intelligence quotient in the country? Really?
No, it's an
Not really
indication.
intelligence. No,
right, because there's a normal
It's about the
It's the
education.
system,
You see,
it's
if
the
you have
education system.
If
Right.
you have a situation where, first of all, we have exams for elimination, not for
progressing.
not for progression,
Right.
for elimination.
So what if you've eliminated 80% of
85% to be
First
exact.
of all,
85% have been eliminated.
if the teachers are on strike 3 times a year, how is a child, you know, they go
Learning.
for strike for 1 month, how is a child learning? Of course, this is an indication of how shambolic the education system
True,
is.
but then the point was there's moderation that happens in the sense that if this is the true performance of the students, then we need to moderate the grades. such that-
standardize.
Oh, you
Right,
mean cook the
standardize it.
results?
No,
Right.
because these are raw results. And to be fair, standardization is a process where if the highest mark is a 50, then
Right.
50 is an A.
Right.
And if everybody's...
no,
Right.
come on.
That's
All right,
what
wait.
basically.
I think we have to wrap up that discussion, but it is one that has...
We're still
it's one
talking
that
about
is-
matters education. And now sticking with the education sector, the Commissioner of University Education has warned holders of university degrees who do not meet the basic criteria for admission to a degree program that their qualifications are invalid. The basic criteria are a C+ grade or a diploma earned over 3 years. Meanwhile, the Council of Legal Education requires that KCSE students score a B+ to be admitted to the Kenya School of Law. Those who studied under a British system must do their A-levels. Are we slowly moving towards a scenario where good education could become inaccessible? This is the question, ladies. 85% of the country failed almost flat. That leaves 15% who are going to progress to the next level of their education. What are we saying about, like Sharon says, we're questioning the very intelligence of an entire nation. How do we move forward from this?
Okay, we're not questioning the intelligence. The failure is not the student's performance. The failure is the system. We cannot fix the system by lowering the standardized, what did you say? Make a C into an A.
Yeah.
No, we
Okay,
can't.
okay. Let's
So
change
now
the point
let's-
of view here.
Wait, hang
From
on.
the system to the candidates here, Betty. We're
Okay,
talking
now-
about thousands
now,
of Kenyan students
I was getting
who have
there.
a whole future ahead of them.
I was getting there. We have all these kids who
Right.
have failed,
Right.
okay? And this is what I suggest. You make a concession. You create a bridging program for all of them. That is the one that you standardize.
Right.
You sort out the educational system for the rest who are behind, okay? And then now we're talking about the ones in the university. Me, I'm very sorry. If you cheated your way to get in, because me, I didn't.
Then
If you
that-
cheated, if you cheated
All right.
your way to get in.
Because we're almost out of time. I want you, Sarah's last thoughts on this.
On the education
on the
system.
education system.
First of all, like Betty, I say it's not the intelligence of the children, it's the education system, how we teach our children, how the teachers teach the children, and what is required of the children in this particular system. It was just a conveyor belt. They were not learning anything. And we had reached a point where it was mark here, say this, and you will get an A. That is not the point of an education system. So it is a total failure. It needs to change. Matiang'i comes around, says these things, and we say, okay, guys, we've gotten it wrong, so let's go back. On the university situation, you want to tell me that all these students who had, as she says, some students bridged to do the university
Right.
course. So you punish me because I got a C and I got into the university. What about the university? What about the Senate? What do they have to say?
Okay, ladies, it's a very debatable discussion that we have here tonight. Perhaps we shall continue that discourse in due time, but we've come to the end of the show. And we had asked, just very quickly, we had asked our audience that on Twitter poll tonight whether a united opposition can unseat the Jubilee government in this year's general election. And just to sample 2 or 3 of them, we see Bahati Kimo here says that it's not about a united opposition, it's about a united nation and people of Kenya. Omar Salim says that united, yes, they can, but the bigger question is, will they stay united after winning? Joseph Karanja says that never, as long as their agenda only focuses on criticism rather than substantive ideas. Many thanks for your views and for watching us tonight. We do appreciate your continued viewership of this program, and that's where we wrap it up tonight. My name is Sharon Momanyi. Do have a nice evening.